can we ground values, ethics, and even culture in a sort of real way? How many of you lean towards moral realism or some permutation of that? Yep. Okay, we have Anders. James?
No.
No?
No.
Joscha?
I'm an existentialist.
I think that we lost a little bit our way in terms of defining morality in our society. For over 1,000 years, the source of morality was divine will. And after we lost the concept of God in the mainstream of our society, we tried to come up with alternatives. And I think that utilitarianism is an unfinished project that was attempted by a generation of philosophers, and they didn't manage to get it to work. And later generations of philosophers thought that they were onto something and then write about these people who started writing about this, but they also didn't get it to work. And so I don't think that we at the moment have a morality that we could implement in an AI, because it would make logical sense and could be derived from axioms or based on formed into outcomes that give us testable ideas of morality. And the original concept of divine will is, I suspect, something that is underestimated. Right? If you define God not as a supernatural being that is creating physical universes and has no epistemological basis, but as the best collective agent that can be enacted by agents who decide to act coherently, then we can think from this perspective, or the best possible agent that we can be part of, what should be done. And that leads to a possibility to discuss a morality that is also compatible with the notion that Robin and James have mentioned. How can we get humanity to collaborate? What is the direction in which we should collaborate? And it is when we are forming an agency together with each other and together with possibly also other species, what is the best possible thing that could be done under such a system in which it's harmonic, and then we can try to come up with criteria of discourse to determine how that collaborative agent should define itself.
So the funny thing here is that I'm not terribly far away from Joscha, although I would call myself a moral realist. But I'm a very wussy moral realist. Surprise, surprise, being a rather wussy person, according to most ideologies, being very Scandinavian about it. I think in general, there are some patterns that just happen because of game theory and symmetries of reality that mean that certain behaviors have certain consequences. And then you get some patterns that are self-consistent, and they are going to work out much better than others. Now, for a particular kind of creature like humans, we create social structures and normative structures, and there is both a kind of evolutionary competition between them. Some ways of organizing society collapse rather rapidly and get replaced with others. Some are fairly effective and get copied by other observers. But there are also some patterns that have natural dynamics to them. For example, a few years back, I had a paper where I looked at what happens if agents are able to change their social value orientation. So they can literally decide whether they care about others or not. So they can move around in the social value space. And the prediction my co-author and me had from the start was, they're all going to become a kind of a sociopathic individualists. It didn't happen. They turned more or less pro-social. They cared about their own payoff in various games and in the payoff of the other part. And this was not because of niceness. Eventually we realized it's just a symmetry argument. If I'm trying to make sure my score is high and your score is high, you have the same goals as I do if I'm playing with somebody else who's pro-social. If I'm an individualist who wants to maximize my score and don't care about your score, and you're an individualist, we're having kind of opposed views, so we're getting into a more complicated situation. It turns out that it's easier to satisfy things if you're pro-social. So in this case, symmetry worked out rather nicely, and you got a nice result. And I think the same thing is true for some aspects of morality. Now, the problem might be that if you're a radically different kind of agent, some important aspects might become very different. For example, the fact that humans currently, if we die permanently, and it's very hard to come back from that. That is linked to the kind of organism we are. But if we were software with easy backups, killing other entities to make a point in a discussion might actually be just seen as, okay, slightly rude. But it doesn't have that moral importance. You do change it a lot. And this, of course, means that if you're dealing with aliens that are fundamentally different, now you might have an interesting moral problem. But it's also pretty likely that the space of possible consistent morality can be pretty large. I don't know if this turns out to be uncountably large, or that there are actually 17 consistent moralities possible in this universe, and every civilization eventually ends up adhering to one of them.
I'd say that what we know about human cultural evolution suggests there are a great many different possible equilibrium of culture. Certainly what we know about biological evolution is that there can be enormous biological variety in a world of strong biological selection, and culture seems to be similar. So, I mean, not everything would be selectable. That is, not all possible organisms exist in biology. Yeah, so there's definitely some constraints, but there's huge variety of organisms in biology, and I think there'll be a huge variety of cultures that are consistent not only with humans, but AIs, et cetera, in the future. So within the variety of cultures of the ones that survive the selection process, I don't see a basis for choosing. That's the sense in which I would be a relativist and not a realist. I mean, there might be one of the cultures has it right and they've got moral truth, but I don't see how it wins against the others. The other cultures could just coexist and do fine as well.
Just in terms of xenobiological speculation and this cosmic sociology question, I've never been very impressed with people who try to make generalizations about the kinds of cultures that we would encounter. You're one of them, Robin. Your expansionary thesis, I guess, is a version of. I guess it's not a.
What's a selection effect?
Yeah.
I might say there are some selection effects, and we can predict the consequences of them. But there's a lot of cultures consistent with those selection effects. So yeah. Yes, I think selection for expansion is likely over long time scales.
Yeah, but the idea that they would be inevitably aggressive or inevitably cooperative or something like that.
The ones that are selected will be more so.
Right.
Again, it's not an inevitability. I mean, obviously there's enormous variety, but if you're looking for tendencies, then.
Well, but you're arguing then that cooperation wouldn't be selected for.
Cooperation within the expansionary groups would be selected for, right?
Okay, so if we're running around with existentially catastrophic weapons and we're not a cooperative society, we may converge on extinction.
Because cooperation is not an unconditional thing. So, intelligent cooperation strategies are quite conditional. They are about cooperating with these groups in these situations and not those and that. That's what real successful cooperation is about. There is no generic cooperation or generic aggression. Those don't make sense.
Indeed, in the first serious attempt at doing some kind of astrosociology, that is Carl Sagan and Shklovsky, they were writing in the 60s and first bringing up the issue of existential risk as an answer to the Fermi paradox. And of course, during the Cold War, this was a very natural thing to do. Their argument was very much like there might be a lot of civilization coming into being, and then they get very strongly selected against if they can't handle the nuclear weapons. The few that survive, they are presumably good at cooperating. They were very optimistic about them being nice. But I think that might have been a bit premature. But it was an interesting argument that you get these selection bottlenecks that generate particular kinds of civilizations that then might do other things. So in the Sagan model, it might be that then they might become quiet civilizations or grabby ones, but they're still very likely to be cooperators because they have managed to handle dangerous weapons of mass destruction.
Certainly over the last few centuries, we've seen enormous selection on Earth for ability to cooperate. Industrial economy is all based on the ability to manage large organizations and to make them work. Enormous abilities to cooperate. Of course, markets are a form of cooperation. We don't have massive war all over the world, which means we have sufficient military cooperation to prevent massive war. So we are a planet of a lot of cooperation, clearly, and we've had a lot of selection for cooperation of certain sorts. That doesn't mean we're all nice to each other, and it would be nice to any alien who showed up.
I think it might be interesting to take a software-centric perspective rather than a civilization or individual-centric perspective. I'm basically a software that is possessing a region of the physical universe to some degree. And what I identify myself as is not something that is God-given, but it's a story that this agent tells itself about what it is and what it performs as. And what determines my success ultimately in an evolutionary game is whether the structure that I impose by controlling the region of the universe that I can affect is sustainable and whether I can defend it against competition. And in this way, there are different strategies. What Anders describes is if I maximize not only my score, but also your score and so on, we can get to an agreement that despite being transactional is leading to something that looks somewhat collaborative and altruistic. I suspect that if you are identifying as part of a system that is more important than yourself, you switch from the single-celled mode to a multicellular mode, to a state-building mode. And humanity is by and large a states-building species, even though not every individual is. Right? We do have sociopathic individuals that are unable to identify with the goals of groups or civilization itself, but we have a lot of people which find it very natural based on their priors to identify with group-level goals or planet-level goals or idea-level goals. And all these identifications are in evolutionary competition and lead to the emergence of different moralities. And I'm also a moral realist in the sense that not every morality is going to be supportive to your survival, and ultimately evolution is going to win.
But when it wins, variety might win as the win.
It might,
right?
But unless you have
what's
an
our
optimum.
experience so far in cultures and in biology is variety is what wins, not any one particular thing.
Yes, it's also because we are very far from some kind of provable optimum in settling the planet. Right? Evolution has not converged to some kind of stable optimum. Instead, you have trajectories that are competing branches that grow, wither, and die. And so far, that's always continued like this. But imagine that we have a phase transition where life gets dramatically more compute and can indeed have provable optima of the organization of matter in a region of space. In that case, you might end up with singletons.
Or lots of copies of optimal organisms. I've been having a long-running argument with a friend about the design of self-replicating von Neumann probes. And I generally think that I can make a general one. It's not going to replicate as rapidly as a specialized one for that particular solar system, but it's good enough for most solar systems. So if I were to build that and send it off, it could get most of the resource in the universe. And my friend is arguing, no, you need to optimize it for each solar system, and it's actually a complex problem. And then we have ended up with a big argument about the asteroid types and what the spectra of other exoplanets are. So we're getting into a lot of interesting technical weeds, but the real issue is, of course, the state space that you're trying to act in. How complex is it? Do you know that from the start? Can you prove optima? For many systems, we know that we can't prove optima particularly well because they're too computationally complex. And then usually we get the rejoinder from some other computational complexity theories. Yeah, but we can approximate it within 0.5% polynomial time. So the remaining 0.5% might not matter that much.
But